Traveling to Consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome back to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, I'm your host, Clayton Cuteri, and in today's podcast, we are going to be discussing a very touchy subject, a subject that involves a current Supreme Court case where they are trying to rule on gender-affirming care. And I feel that this is a very important conversation for us to have. It is not an easy one by any stretch of the imagination. It is not an easy one. And I think that it can be very quick and easy for us to cast ideas into certain buckets and dismiss them. But we need to have a grown-up, professional, adequate conversation if we're going to handle this appropriately. If we're going to be able to give people the proper care, attention, the proper validation in their emotions that we possibly can. And I don't see this discourse occurring in the public space, so we're going to have it here. Now, with this being said, I do want to encourage you listeners, people within the spirituality community, to realize that you have a responsibility in the public discourse. Maybe it's not specifically about this, but you have a responsibility whenever it comes to the policies and the direction that our country goes. Because for so long, the spirituality community has been a place, a community where we have been told that politics and money is not for spiritually enlightened people. And this could not be further from the truth. This is a program, a mental program that has been created in order for us to stay out of politics and out of money. Because with politics, with money, comes power and responsibility. And for you, the spiritually enlightened, you need power, you need responsibility. Because this world is very, very dark, and there is nowhere for us to go but up. But that only occurs if spiritual people become wealthy and get positions of political power. And so whenever I go into this podcast, I want to be even more clear that we need to have enlightened conversations around this specific issue. Because to me, this is one of the bedrock issues that is going to forge our nation and the world moving forward, because it involves the youth of our nation, the kids, the ones who we're supposed to protect and honor. And as a man, as someone in politics, as someone who wants to see a better world for our next generation, this is where it all starts. And I see it as and this is why I see it as one of the most important conversations for us to have, because it does involve our youth, it involves our kids. And even though they may not be biological, I still see every single child as a son or a daughter of mine. And so with that being said, this podcast will likely be controversial, but we need to have this conversation. We need to converse about this conversation. In this podcast, we're back to the war on language as well. Maybe you didn't realize that from the title, but this is also going to be a podcast about the war that's occurring on our language and our speech. Because we have two competing ideas right now, which is the idea of gender, the gender theory, and then sex, biological sex. Now, the way that this breaks down is sex is science-based. Sex is based on your chromosomes, male, female, and intersex. And if you don't know about intersex, it's when you have a different combination of chromosomes, neither XX nor XY. And so I forget exactly the percentage, but it's somewhere about 1 to 5%. But if it's 1% of a population of 300 million, that's still 3 million people in America who are intersex. And that's just biological. Sometimes they can be born with both genitalia, different genitalia. I don't know all of the combinations, but it's its own sex that deserves its own podcast, quite frankly. And I am not qualified in any way to give my opinion or my scientific understanding of it. So I just want to put that there, that sex is male, female, and intersex. Gender, whenever we're talking about it, is this theory that it's based essentially around how you feel. And again, it's very important for us to pay attention to how we feel. The problem is when we start implementing policies around how we feel, because how we feel can change in every single moment. Now, when we're talking about gender, it's what they always say, a social construct. It is something that is placed upon us at birth. It's something that is not tied to your sex. And again, that's fine. I am all on board if you wish to be a genetic female who identifies as a male, a genetic male who identifies as a female. I think that that's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool that that exists, that there are people who are so comfortable in that emotions and feeling those energies for a long period of time, and that they're comfortable in doing that. But what we need to have a very, very serious discussion about is whenever it comes to the medical treatment of kids and the youth of our nation. Because this is where we have a very serious issue. And for us to start this conversation, I think we have to go back to where this conversation even started. And if you don't know, it started with a man by the name of Dr. John Money. And it was a gender experiment. And he did it with I believe I'm pronouncing this correct, the Reimer twins. So here's what happened. In 1965, David Reimer and his twin were born. Now, at 8 months old, David had a botched circumcision that accidentally cut off his private parts. And now, I want to be clear as well that this is going to be a very emotionally disturbing part of this podcast. But I do believe that it is our responsibility to feel what exactly went through with David Reimer. I hope it's Reimer. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And his brother. Because what occurred here is what set the foundation for gender theory. And if we're not able to look at this, if you're not able to evaluate this conversation of David Reimer and what his brother went through, then I think that we need to, I don't know that we're able to have any other further conversation around gender theory if you can't look at this objectively and feel what they went through, because it is difficult, don't get me wrong. But this is where it comes back to highly evolved, highly conscious individuals need to be in positions of power so that we can have these conversations. So here's what happened. When David was 8 months old, his private parts were damaged during a botched circumcision. Now, John Money, a psychologist from Johns Hopkins University, had a prominent reputation in the field of sexual development and gender identity. So David's parents took David to see Dr. Money. And what this doctor, it's hard for me to even say his name because of how tragic all of this is. He advised and encouraged them to reassign David's sex as a girl through surgical, hormonal, and psychological treatments. Because John Money's belief was that gender identity was primarily learned through one's upbringing, as opposed to the inborn traits. It's the nurture versus nature conversation. So he proposed, because we had to do this with live people, he proposed that gender identity could be changed through behavioral interventions. He advocated that gender reassignment was the solution for treating any child with intersex traits, or atypical sex anatomies. So again, this is that issue is where we start combining sex with gender. right? He's saying if someone has intersex traits, right? If they're born with two genitae or two separate genitals, right? Female anatomy, male anatomy, then we can fix it.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Are we all psychic?
What are spirit guides and angels?
What is energy healing?
What's a ghost?
Do I have a soul contract?
What's a soul even?
Hello, Voyagers. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Frank.
And we started Clairvoyaging Podcast when our 5-year-old niece correctly predicted the death of a stranger.
We decided that it was time to learn more about things that can't be easily explained.
Join us as we interview psychics and experts about the basics of esotericism and try to enhance our intuitive abilities.
Come for the development, stay for the underdeveloped jokes.
Clairvoyaging Podcast. Normalize your spiritual journey with us on any podcast platform.
We can just decide what they are. So then at the age of 22 months year old, almost 2, David underwent extensive surgery as a 22-year-old baby, in which his male genital were surgically removed and female genital was constructed. So at this point, David's parents decided to raise him as a female. They gave him the name Brenda because it was similar to his birth name. David was given estrogen. He was given estrogen to promote the development of breasts and forced to wear dresses and was directed to engage in typical female norms such as playing with dolls and mingling with other girls. Now, I find it very important here when we're talking about estrogen and testosterone, injections in particular, is that it has been proven that these will cause damage to the brain. I know there's a whole bunch of science out there nowadays talking about how it can be reversed and puberty blockers aren't a big deal. It's all BS. And Clayton, you're not a doctor. How do you know this? When I was in college, 2012 to 2017, I was in the bodybuilding scene. And I learned a lot about steroids. I learned a lot about hormones. And this was all before kind of all of this erupted, this idea of transgenderism. It was still there, don't get me wrong, but like when we start talking about the medical interventions and all the science, all of the people who were in these bodybuilding forums talked about how damaging putting injections of testosterone or estrogen in your body was, more specifically too, especially before the age of 25. I cannot tell you how many posts I have read in bodybuilding, and there might be still there on bodybuilding.com. You can probably still find them, of people constantly saying how bad it is for you, even as a male or a female, to be putting estrogen in your body before the age of 25. And most of them recommended it not even till the age of 30. Because one, your body's producing so much testosterone and estrogen or testosterone already, you don't need the extra benefits in order to gain muscle mass. But the second one, and more importantly, I believe for this conversation, is brain development. Our brains are still developing until the age of 25 and 30. 30 for men, I believe, and probably low 20s for females. At least that's what it used to be. But who knows? Because the poisoning of our food and water supply have made it even more difficult for us to understand what's going on here. The additives of fluoride, atrazine, pesticides, herbicides is completely destroying our hormone cycles, putting us completely out of sync with nature. And you don't need any other evidence of this than girls going through puberty at a much younger age. And I suppose boys are as well. I haven't done as much research into that, but I assume that they are as well. And so we have to take a step back and say, how are our hormones being manipulated? And what effect is this going to have in the next 20, 30 years on our brain development? So to get back to our story, to be at the age of 22 months and be getting hormone injections, for a politically correct term, is insane. Absolutely insane. But let's see how this story keeps unfolding, because trust me, if you thought it was bad, it gets worse. So throughout childhood, David, or Brenda now, was never informed that he was biologically male and that he was an experimental test subject in a controversial investigation to bolster Money's belief in theory of gender neutrality. Essentially, that nurture, not nature, determines the gender identity and sexual orientation. So again, getting away from nature, literally in the nurture versus nature, is that they're getting away from nature. And they're also promoting the idea that nurture is independent of nature, as if those are somehow disconnected. It's very evil. That's actually a very evil discussion that I think about it, but that's for a whole nother podcast. But then even goes on to say that that determines gender identity and sexual orientation. So then what is someone's sex? Are we just throwing out the window the fact that he has XY chromosomes? It's a part of the discussion. And furthermore, David's twin brother, Brian, and also that's why they picked Brenda, was because it was close to Brian. So they wanted to isolate as many variables as possible. So David's twin brother, Brian, served as the control because the brothers had the same genetic makeup and chromosomes, but one was raised as a girl and the other as a boy. Money continued, and this is, again, please guys, ground yourself, take a deep breath, because this is where, and I'm saying this for you as well as myself, because this is where I get angry. This brings up difficult emotions within me because of the way that these kids were dealt with, and I can even feel some tears coming to my eyes. So stick with me on this, okay? Money continued to see David and Brenda for consultations and checkups annually. During these checkups, Money would force the twins to rehearse sexual acts and inspect one another's genitals. On some occasions, Money would even photograph the twins doing these exercises. Money claimed that childhood sexual rehearsal play was important for healthy childhood sexual exploration. David also recalls receiving anger and verbal abuse from Money if they resisted participation. This is pure evil. This is pure evil. Kids have no reason to be sexualized before puberty. No reason at all. All of these sexual books that they're starting to put in kindergarten, grade school, young grade school, not even high school, but middle school and kindergarten, sixth graders, there's videos of them reading books about sexual acts that have been placed in kids' books, children's books. And this is exactly who we have to protect. We have to keep the innocence of children. We have to protect the innocence of the children, of our next generation. And I don't see it that us injecting hormones into kids does that for our future generation. I see it as making a lot of money for big pharma. They project that transition surgeries are supposed to double in profits for medical institutions in the next 5 years. So are they really doing it for the betterment of society, or are they doing it for their wallet book? And after John Money decided to sexually abuse these kids, photograph them, force them to engage in sexual rehearsal play with their brother or slash sister, and yelled at them if they did not explore each other sexually. In 1972, Money reported in what he called the John Joan case, because he wanted to keep their names anonymous, Money described that this transition was successful. 72, which means the twins would have been 7 years old. The twins would have been 7 years old, and Money described this transition as successful. They would have been 7 years old, and he said that this was a success. He claimed that David / Brenda behaved like a little girl and did not demonstrate any of the boyish mannerisms of the twin brother Brian. Money would publish this data to reinforce his theories on gender fluidity and to justify that gender identity is primarily learned. However, in reality, David was never happy. Brenda was never happy as a girl. He rejected his female identity and experienced severe gender dysphoria, which is real, by the way. I'm not discounting that. I know gender dysphoria is real, which is when you believe you're in the wrong body. He would complain to his parents and teachers that he felt like a boy and would refuse to wear dresses or play with dolls. He was severely bullied in school, experienced suicidal depression throughout adolescence. Upon learning about the truth about his birth and sex from his father, he learned this at the age of 15. David reassumed his gender identity as David and decided to start calling himself David again. He then underwent treatments to reverse the assignment, his testosterone injections, his surgery, and surgeries to remove the breasts, reconstruct his male genitalia. And interesting enough, he got married at the age of 22 to a woman named Jane, and they adopted 3 children, because obviously there's no chance that he's ever going to have his own biological kids of his own. And that's another thing that we're not talking about here, is that these kids, whichever side they're on, once you go through those puberty blockers, once you go through those chemicals, because that's what it is essentially chemical castration, they're not having any kids whenever they get older. It's not possible. It won't be possible. And then Dr. Milton Diamond, a psychologist and sexologist at the University of Miami, met with an academic rival of John David to discuss his story in the mid-1990s. And thank you to Dr. Diamond, because he brought David's experience to international attention by reporting these true outcomes of David's case. So that's 1997 that we learned about all of this happening. So 1997 minus 65 to 32. So it wasn't until he was 32 years old that all of this came to light. And quite frankly, give David any sort of validation. Reporting on the true outcome of David's case to prevent physicians from making similar decisions when treating infants. Diamond helped to debunk Money's theory, and quite frankly, I don't know if Money served any time in jail, but he absolutely should, for crimes against humanity, for crime, just every single thing in the book should be thrown at this guy. But Diamond helped to debunk Money's theory that gender identity could be completely learned through intervention. David continued to suffer from the psychological trauma throughout adulthood, no kidding, due to Money's experiments and the things that he experienced in childhood. David endured unemployment, marital difficulties, and then ultimately the death of his twin brother, Brian. And sadly, the way this story ends is at the age of 38, which would have been in the early 2000s, David committed suicide. And it cannot... Sorry, guys, this is... To me, this just hits such a piece of me that's deeper than humanity. Because it feels as though we're doing the most disservice in the entire world. And I know it can feel like... in a moment, let's say if a kid's coming to you, telling you what gender they are, identity, and how they want to transition, how it can feel like doing that for them is the best. But this is not being responsible. This is not what it means to be a responsible adult. Kids don't always know what they want or what's best for them. I know there was a very viral video where a kid, a 4-year-old, I think, had a $10,000. His dad put $10,000 and 2 Oreos on a table. And he said to the kid, "You can pick one of these. Which do you want?" The kid was like, "The Oreos." He's like, "Wait, so you're saying you don't want the $10,000? He's like, "No, I want the Oreos." He's like, "You can choose whichever one you want and I'll give it to you." He said, "Yeah, I want the Oreos." This whole conversation takes me to a very sad place. And if you're listening to this, I don't even know if you can tell on camera, but I'm definitely fighting off some tears going through this, because this is just something that every single time I hear a story of a kid being transitioned, going through hormones, being placed on hormones, having their genitals castrated, being chemically circumcised, chemically castrated is essentially the medical term of what we're doing here. And everyone wants to throw around the Nazis. Well, guess who chemically castrated people? There were probably I'm sure there were people before them, but that's a big one. You guys want to talk about that? And what's even sad about this is originally, so what we're looking at here would be from the dates of, what's also sad about this would be from the dates of when he published his thing as being a success in 1972, all the way until 1997, it dominated the field, which means more people were creating studies that validated this, which continue this perpetuation. And because of that, it's still deeply divided on how to handle intersex infants, which is completely different, okay? Again, I want to be very clear about that, is how they slip in here. It is very different how we handle intersex infants versus a male or a female who wants to transition, a kid, a child. And I mean, I look at it and I don't even know if 18 is the right age for us to be chemically castrating. I don't know. I think we need to have that conversation. And this is where I need the American people to enter this, the spiritual people to enter this conversation. Because I can't figure this out all on my own. I need to have a conversation about it. My inner eye will only take me so far on this. But we have to be protecting the innocence of kids. Because if the brain, science, right? We want to talk about science. The brain is still developing until 25 or 30. Do we wait till then? And I think people should be free to do whatever they want. I truly do. But at what age do we need to protect kids from this type of sexual torment. We have to protect our kids. And the reason all of this was brought up was because the Supreme Court is looking at a case and trying to understand gender reassignment surgery. Is that a federal issue? Is that a state's issue? They're trying to figure that out. And the quote, it's not my quote, but the quote that sticks with me and resonates to my core is, if your genitalia does not confirm your gender identity, then why does removing it confirm it? If your genitalia does not confirm your gender identity, then why does removing your genitalia confirm your genitalia identity? And I've coached jujitsu, kids jujitsu ages 3 to 13. And the innocence, the pure innocence that I see in those kids is so beautiful. So beautiful. To realize that there's so much, I think, as adults that we could learn from kids, in fact. From the way that they just explore life without any attachment or detachment or just anything. They're in this place of bliss. And for us to invite in such a difficult conversation of even just sex, forget about sexual ideology, gender ideology, transitioning, forget about all of that, but just the core concept of just sex is a difficult conversation to have. And if we're exposing kids to that too early, we're robbing them of that innocence, of that purity. So it's sad. It's very sad. And that's why I really want to have this conversation about it. And I know that I've kind of gone through and pointed out all the issues I see with it. Let me at least provide where I feel like we can go with this, like a way out of here. So that I'm not just being another person who's just like, here's the issues that we're facing without a solution. So I'm a big studier of history. I think it's very important to study history, to study past historical figures, especially on my way into politics. I need to study how politicians, what they did right, what they did wrong. You know, they say a smart man learns from his mistakes, a wise man learns from other people's mistakes. So in my quest to become wise, I need to learn from other people's mistakes. And one figure in particular was Alexander the Great in ancient Greece. Now, there's a whole lot we could say about Alexander the Great, but what I want to focus on is whenever his sexual identity, his sexual orientation. And what was really beautiful, I think, about ancient Egyptian culture, ancient Greek culture, there were some issues around their sexual. They had a little bit of issues with older men and young boys. We'll put that to the side for now. But in regards to Alexander specifically, there was a guy who he was really good friends with as a kid and growing up. And nobody really knows exactly for sure if they were doing sexual acts together, if they weren't. It seemed like they were, but no one can really pinpoint. So then that raises the question for historians as to, was Alexander the Great gay? Was he bi? And essentially he would have been bi. He had some wives. So they're like, was he bi? Was he gay? What was going on here? And in this, my own research in this is that it kind of became a moot point, because in ancient Greek culture, they didn't have any sort of identification of being straight or gay or lesbian or queer or bisexual. Those terms just didn't exist. It was just love. If you love someone and you wanted to express that physically, go for it. It didn't make you anything. It just made an expression of love in the way that you wanted to create it. And I think there's something extremely beautiful about that. And then I realized that this could also play onto the stage with the pronoun conversation. Now, I'm not advocating for this. This is, again, why we need very highly conscious, spiritually enlightened people to enter into politics, is because I need to be able to have these conversations with those people so that we can create a more prosperous world, the new earth, the new heaven on earth. So where this comes to pronouns is this. Right now, we are trying to almost, it seems to me, divide ourselves, dissect ourselves down to like make ourselves unique butterflies. And we are, don't get me wrong. You absolutely are very unique, and you have a very unique gift to offer this world. Because who told me this? There was a quote that I also heard, which is to the effect of, God is everything in existence, and that makes him perfect. So if you didn't exist, God wouldn't be perfect. So you are literally created out of perfection. Yes, we have flaws in air quotes, and we can always become better. But the reason that you, the person listening to this right now, are on this planet, you have a very, very special mission. And maybe you don't see it right now. It's okay. Maybe it takes time. Maybe you're not asking the right questions. That's a whole different conversation. But the point I'm getting at is that yes, everyone is special. The mistake is trying to find that special or uniqueness in your pronouns. There's this whole conversation of, well, pronouns are a sign of respect. And I know that that is not true, because there are so many people that I lack respect for, but I'll still call them a he or a she. It's a pronoun. So the amount of weight and gravitas that we have given to pronouns is crazy to me. But here's where I want to combine the two things, right? Let's get back to the whole Alexander the Great part. And again, I'm not advocating for this. I just think it would be a very good conversation to have. Which is this, right? Right now, the two primary pronouns would be he, her, him, she, or he, what is it? He, she, his, her, they, them, right? Those are kind of like the primary ones. Now, in my opinion, where we're going into society is everyone wants their own pronouns. Everyone wants to be a unique pronoun, essentially. And I don't think that's an appropriate way for someone to realize the divinity within themselves. If anything, and again, not advocating for this, just feel like it's a good conversation to have. If anything, we should be going the opposite direction. We should just find one pronoun that signifies he, she, one pronoun that signifies his, her, and one pronoun that signifies they, them. So that we stop dividing. We can stop, because, right, if he, she is based in gender ideology, which we just went down that entire rabbit hole, and we want to move away from that. And, I see that as there's validity to that conversation. If we want to move away from that, then we need to find a way to come together in these things. And that becomes tricky, definitely becomes tricky. But if we truly want to be inclusive, see everyone as one, I see it that we need to go that direction. Instead of creating more pronouns, get rid of all of them. Just have one. And again, I can see problems with that, confusion. So again, I just want to be very clear that I'm not full on board advocating for that. I just think that that's a proper discussion that we should be having as people. But the only way that we can create that is by having political power as spiritual, as conscious individuals. Because if you're not powerful, if you're enlightened but you're not powerful, then you can't do anything with your ability to care so deeply about everyone and everything. So again, we have to take care of our children. first and foremost, protect them at all costs from the state, from surgery, from chemicals. Why are we even giving ADHD medication to kids, acting as if they're the issue and not the fact that red, all these dyes, all these color dyes, red 40, yellow, blue 2. Why are we not acting like those are the issues? Not the fact that we have to keep medicating our kids, the fact that their school environment is set up in order for them to basically suck the life out of them, sit in a little cubicle while they stare at a teacher that they don't really care what they have to say. So again, the history of gender ideology is steeped in a very ugly nature. And I think we have to appreciate that for what it is. And I think that if you're not able to even look at that, then we can't have a conversation about where we move forward as a society. We have to respect our kids. And we have to get spiritual people into politics. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. None of this is going to work. We're not going to create peace. We're not going to become enlightened. All of it will be an issue. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to start trying to upload these podcasts in full to YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment. If you're listening on Spotify, please leave a comment. Engage. Shoot me a message and share this with people. Share this. Because this is how the knowledge gets out there to people. This is how we create world peace. Is spiritually enlightened people get involved in politics and become powerful. Otherwise, darkness will continue to rule, and we can't have that. So with all that being said, I appreciate you all. I look forward to speaking with you all whenever we see each other in the 6th dimension.